What happens when a country that many people were told to dismiss begins building the very thing that can change its future for years? Burkina Faso has been described through one narrow lens: conflict, poverty, instability, crisis. Those words have followed the country across international headlines, as if an entire nation of millions could be reduced to fear and dust. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, something different is beginning to move, quietly, steadily, and with a message the world can no longer ignore. Electric buses are carrying ordinary people at prices many families can actually afford. Electric taxis are appearing in the city, offering a cleaner and more modern way to travel. Roads are being rebuilt. Rail links are being discussed as tools of trade, not just transportation. New urban spaces are rising, bringing shops, services, jobs, and a new sense of possibility. This is why the story of Captain Ibrahim Traore is no longer only a story about security. It is becoming a story about development, national confidence, and the right of an African nation to build its own future. The question is simple, but powerful. Is Burkina Faso only trying to survive? Or is it quietly preparing to transform itself? Because transportation is never just about movement. It decides whether a worker can reach a job, whether a farmer can sell his goods, whether a business can grow, and whether a city can breathe. When a government changes how people move, it can also change how a nation thinks, trades, builds, and dreams. In this video, we will look beyond the headlines and examine how Ibrahim Traore's government is using transportation as the backbone of a much larger strategy. We will look at electric buses, electric taxis, roads, rail, urban growth, Western criticism, and the lessons other African nations may learn from this bold experiment. And if you believe Africa's untold stories deserve to be heard with honesty and depth, follow this channel as we continue to uncover the changes many powerful voices would rather ignore. For decades, one challenge has quietly held Burkina Faso back more than many people realize. It was not only insecurity, political instability, or limited industrial capacity. It was also the simple act of moving people and goods across the country. In a nation without direct access to the sea, transportation has never been a convenience. It has always been a matter of economic survival. Before the recent wave of infrastructure projects, daily transportation was often expensive, slow, and unreliable. In many parts of the country, owning a motorcycle was almost a necessity rather than a luxury. For families without private transportation, getting to work, visiting a hospital, attending school, or reaching a local market could become a costly and time-consuming challenge. Taxi services existed, but they were often beyond the budget of ordinary workers who depended on every franc they earned. These transportation difficulties affected much more than individual households. Every additional expense paid by a commuter became another burden on family finances. Every delay in delivering goods increased costs for businesses. Farmers transporting crops from rural communities to urban markets frequently faced higher transportation expenses, reducing the profit they could earn from an entire season of hard work. Small businesses struggled to expand because moving products across the country remained expensive and inefficient. Economists have long argued that transportation forms the backbone of every successful economy. Roads, buses, railways, and logistics networks do far more than connect cities. They connect opportunities. They allow workers to reach employers, manufacturers to reach customers, and investors to see potential where isolation once existed. History has shown that countries investing in transportation often create the conditions for broader economic growth that follows years later. For Burkina Faso, this reality carries even greater importance. As a landlocked country, it depends heavily on efficient domestic transportation to remain competitive. Every improvement in mobility has the potential to lower business costs, encourage investment, strengthen internal trade, and improve everyday life for millions of citizens. This explains why the transportation projects emerging under Captain Ibrahim Traore are attracting attention. They are not simply about adding buses or paving roads. They represent an attempt to remove one of the country's oldest barriers to long-term development and replace it with a foundation capable of supporting economic transformation. For many people, the first visible sign that something was changing in Burkina Faso was not a political speech or an international summit. It was the arrival of electric buses on the streets of Ouagadougou. What appeared to be a simple transportation project actually represented a much broader vision. Instead of accepting that modern public transportation was something only wealthier nations could afford, Burkina Faso began investing in a system designed to make daily travel cheaper, cleaner, and more accessible. One of the most immediate benefits has been affordability. Public transportation only creates real economic value when ordinary citizens can actually use it. Reports and first-hand experiences have shown that a single bus ticket can cost only a fraction of what many people previously paid for private transportation. For workers who travel every day, this difference is significant. Money that once disappeared into transportation costs can now help pay for food, school supplies, health care, or savings for the future. Small, daily savings, multiplied across thousands of families, can create meaningful economic impact over time. The buses themselves also symbolize something larger than transportation. Burkina Faso has promoted the local assembly of electric buses, demonstrating an ambition to develop domestic industrial capacity rather than relying entirely on imported, finished products. Every locally assembled vehicle represents new technical skills, employment opportunities for engineers and mechanics, and valuable experience that can strengthen the country's manufacturing sector in the years ahead. Electric transportation may also help reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels over the long term. Although no country can transform its entire energy system overnight, introducing electric buses is an important first step toward lowering fuel consumption while exploring cleaner alternatives for public transportation. The experience of passengers tells another part of the story. Modern buses equipped with air conditioning offer a level of comfort that many commuters previously did not expect from public transportation. Yet, challenges remain. New users sometimes struggle to identify the correct routes, and better digital information systems would make the network far easier to navigate. Even so, these growing pains are common whenever a country introduces a new transportation system. For Ibrahim Traore's government, these electric buses are doing far more than carrying passengers. They are carrying the message that development can begin with practical improvements that ordinary citizens experience every single day. As Burkina Faso continues modernizing its public transportation system, another major piece of the puzzle is beginning to emerge. While affordable buses provide mobility for the masses, a growing network of electric taxis is introducing a different kind of convenience. Together, these two systems are not competing with each other. They are designed to serve different needs while moving the country toward a smarter transportation future. Unlike traditional taxis that rely on passengers waving them down, the new electric taxi services operate through mobile applications. With only a few taps on a smartphone, passengers can request a ride, view estimated fares, and travel directly to their destination in an air-conditioned vehicle. For business travelers, tourists, or anyone needing flexible transportation, this represents a significant improvement over older systems. The introduction of app-based transportation also signals Burkina Faso's growing interest in digital public services. Modern transportation today is no longer measured only by the number of vehicles on the road. It is also measured by how efficiently technology connects people with those vehicles. This shift brings Burkina Faso closer to transportation models already common in many parts of the world. However, modernization also reveals new challenges. Early users have reported that some transportation applications remain available primarily in French, creating difficulties for international visitors and non-French speakers. Information about bus routes, schedules, and station locations can also be difficult to access, unlike many global cities where passengers can easily navigate transportation through official websites or interactive maps. Burkina Faso is still building the digital infrastructure needed to support its physical investments. These shortcomings should not be viewed as signs of failure. Instead, they reflect the natural evolution of a transportation system still in its early stages. Many successful public transit systems around the world began with similar limitations before gradually expanding their digital services, multilingual support, and passenger information platforms. Perhaps the most important lesson is that modernization is not simply about purchasing new vehicles. It requires an entire ecosystem that includes technology, customer information, digital accessibility, maintenance, and continuous improvement. Electric buses and electric taxis may be the most visible symbols of change, but behind them lies the much larger challenge of creating a transportation network that ordinary citizens can trust, understand, and use with confidence every day. If Burkina Faso succeeds in building that complete ecosystem, today's transportation reforms could become one of the country's most important foundations for long-term economic growth. While buses and electric taxis are transforming daily transportation inside Burkina Faso's cities, Ibrahim Traore's government appears to be pursuing a much broader objective. A nation cannot build a stronger economy if people move efficiently within cities while goods remain trapped by weak connections between regions. This is why highways, railways, and logistics corridors have become central to the country's long-term development strategy. One of the government's most important priorities is improving transportation between Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso, the country's two largest economic centers. Every truck transporting agricultural products, construction materials, manufactured goods, or consumer supplies depends on reliable roads. Every hour saved during transportation reduces fuel costs, lowers delivery expenses, and improves the competitiveness of local businesses. Railway development is equally significant. Throughout history, rail systems have supported industrial growth because they move large volumes of cargo more efficiently than road transport alone. For a landlocked country like Burkina Faso, stronger railway connections could reduce logistics costs, improve regional trade, and create faster links with neighboring countries and access to international ports. Another important initiative is Faso-Mebo, which focuses on expanding and improving road infrastructure while encouraging greater use of local expertise and national resources. Rather than treating road construction as a simple public works project, the initiative views transportation infrastructure as an investment that can stimulate business activity, connect rural producers with urban markets, and attract future investment. Infrastructure projects also create immediate economic benefits. Construction generates employment for engineers, equipment operators, technicians, suppliers, and thousands of workers. After completion, improved roads and transport corridors continue supporting agriculture, commerce, tourism, manufacturing, and other productive sectors for many years. These ambitious projects will require substantial investment, careful planning, and consistent maintenance. Their long-term success will depend not only on building new infrastructure, but also on managing it efficiently. If these transportation corridors continue expanding successfully, Burkina Faso could achieve something far greater than faster travel. It could establish the logistical backbone needed to strengthen trade, encourage investment, and support sustainable economic growth for decades to come. Transportation does more than connect neighborhoods. It reshapes entire cities. As roads improve and public transit becomes more reliable, businesses begin looking at places they once ignored. Investors become more willing to open stores, restaurants, offices, and service centers. Families gain easier access to employment, education, healthcare, and shopping. Over time, transportation becomes one of the strongest forces behind urban transformation. This pattern is beginning to emerge in parts of Burkina Faso. Areas that benefit from improved infrastructure are gradually attracting more commercial activity. New shopping centers, restaurants, supermarkets, cafes, and service businesses are creating spaces where people can work, shop, and spend time with their families. These developments may appear small when viewed individually, but together they signal a broader shift toward a more diversified urban economy. The growth of commercial districts also creates a ripple effect throughout society. Every new business requires employees, suppliers, maintenance workers, security personnel, and transportation services. Local entrepreneurs gain new customers, while young people discover employment opportunities that previously did not exist. Instead of relying entirely on government jobs or agriculture, urban residents gain access to a wider range of economic activities. Improved transportation also influences property development. When roads become easier to access and commuting becomes more predictable, residential neighborhoods often become more attractive for both families and investors. Businesses naturally seek locations where customers can arrive conveniently, encouraging additional private investment in surrounding communities. For Ibrahim Traore's administration, these urban changes appear closely connected to the broader transportation strategy. Modern buses, improved roads, commercial centers, and public infrastructure are not isolated projects. Together, they help create an environment where economic activity can expand naturally rather than depending solely on government spending. Of course, successful urban development requires careful planning. Rapid growth must be accompanied by reliable public services, environmental management, affordable housing, and continued infrastructure investment. Without these elements, expansion can create new challenges instead of lasting prosperity. Even so, the direction is becoming increasingly clear. Transportation is no longer simply helping people travel across Burkina Faso. It is helping reshape how cities grow, how businesses invest, and how communities imagine their future. If this momentum continues, today's transportation projects could become the foundation for a stronger and more dynamic urban economy in the years ahead. By this point, it becomes clear that Ibrahim Traore's transportation agenda is about far more than moving people from one place to another. Roads, electric buses, taxi services, and railway projects are all visible achievements, but they are also pieces of a much larger vision. At the center of that vision is the idea that Burkina Faso should gradually build the capacity to shape its own economic future, instead of remaining dependent on external solutions. One of the defining characteristics of Traore's leadership has been his repeated emphasis on self-reliance. Rather than presenting development as something that must wait for foreign assistance, his administration has promoted the belief that local resources, local industries, and local talent should play a greater role in national progress. The introduction of locally assembled electric buses reflects this philosophy. Beyond providing affordable transportation, these projects help develop technical skills, create employment, and encourage the growth of domestic manufacturing. This approach also aligns with the broader ideas of Pan-Africanism, which encourage African nations to strengthen cooperation while building greater economic independence. Under this perspective, Infrastructure is not simply a public service. It becomes an instrument of sovereignty. Every road built by local workers, every vehicle assembled domestically, and every improvement in public transportation represents another step toward reducing long-term dependence on imported solutions. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore argue that this strategy marks a significant departure from traditional development models. Instead of measuring success only through foreign investment or international aid, they believe sustainable progress should also be measured by the country's ability to solve its own challenges using local knowledge and national institutions. Of course, turning this vision into lasting success will require patience and consistent execution. Modern transportation systems demand ongoing maintenance, transparent management, skilled personnel, and stable funding. Infrastructure alone cannot transform an economy unless it is supported by sound institutions and long-term planning. Nevertheless, the broader objective is becoming increasingly visible. Transportation is serving as the foundation for a national development strategy that connects infrastructure, industrial growth, technological learning, and economic opportunity. Whether this ambitious vision ultimately fulfills its promise will depend on the years ahead. But one thing is already evident. Ibrahim Traore is attempting to redefine development not simply as economic growth, but as the gradual construction of a more self-confident and self-reliant Burkina Faso. As Burkina Faso's transportation projects have gained international attention, they have also attracted significant criticism from many Western governments, media organizations, and human rights groups. Much of that criticism focuses not on buses, roads, or railway plans, but on the political environment surrounding Ibrahim Traore's government. Questions about military rule, delayed elections, freedom of expression, and human rights continue to shape the international debate. These concerns should not be dismissed. Political stability, transparent institutions, and respect for civil liberties remain essential ingredients for any country's long-term success. Many international organizations argue that economic progress cannot be fully separated from democratic governance, and they continue to monitor developments in Burkina Faso closely. At the same time, supporters of Ibrahim Traore argue that international discussions often overlook another important part of the story. While headlines frequently emphasize political tensions, far less attention is given to the government's efforts to modernize transportation, improve infrastructure, expand public services, and stimulate economic activity. They believe that these projects represent genuine attempts to address problems that have affected ordinary citizens for decades. A balanced assessment requires recognizing both perspectives. It is reasonable to question political decisions while also acknowledging visible infrastructure improvements. Likewise, new roads, electric buses, and transportation reforms should not automatically erase legitimate concerns about governance. Both realities can exist at the same time. Another important consideration is Burkina Faso's security situation. The country continues to face serious threats from armed extremist groups, creating extraordinary pressures on government institutions. Supporters argue that these security challenges make development projects even more important because stronger infrastructure, employment opportunities, and economic growth can contribute to greater long-term stability. Ultimately, the debate surrounding Ibrahim Traore extends far beyond politics alone. It reflects two competing ways of measuring national progress. One focuses primarily on political institutions and democratic procedures. The other emphasizes practical improvements that citizens experience in their daily lives, including transportation, employment, and infrastructure. Whether one perspective outweighs the other remains a matter of opinion. What cannot be denied is that Burkina Faso's transportation transformation has become an important part of this larger international conversation. When viewed separately, electric buses, taxi services, highways, railways, and new commercial districts may appear to be unrelated projects. But when placed together, a much larger picture begins to emerge. They form different parts of a single development strategy designed to reduce transportation costs, strengthen domestic trade, encourage investment, and improve the daily lives of ordinary citizens. This is why transportation has become far more than an infrastructure program. It is gradually becoming an economic strategy. Every affordable bus ticket allows workers to spend less on commuting and keep more of their income. Every improved highway helps businesses move goods faster and more efficiently. Every future railway connection has the potential to reduce logistics costs for agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and regional trade. Together, these improvements create conditions that allow private businesses to expand while making Burkina Faso a more attractive destination for long-term investment. Transportation also influences opportunities far beyond economics. Students can travel more easily to schools and universities. Patients gain faster access to hospitals and healthcare facilities. Farmers reach larger markets before their products lose value. Entrepreneurs can open businesses in areas that were previously difficult to serve. These practical changes often have a greater impact on everyday life than statistics alone can measure. Perhaps the most significant lesson is that no single project can transform a nation overnight. A bus system without reliable roads cannot reach its full potential. Highways without commercial activity generate limited economic value. Railways require industries capable of producing and transporting goods. Successful development depends on connecting each piece into one functioning system. For many observers, this integrated approach explains why Burkina Faso's transportation reforms have attracted growing international attention. The discussion is no longer simply about modern vehicles or improved roads. It is about whether a country facing enormous economic and security challenges can build the foundations for long-term prosperity through strategic infrastructure investment. The answer will not be determined by speeches or political debates alone. It will depend on whether these transportation projects continue expanding, remain financially sustainable, and deliver measurable improvements in the lives of ordinary citizens. If they do, Burkina Faso's transportation revolution may ultimately be remembered not for the vehicles themselves, but for the economic transformation they helped make possible. As the world continues watching Burkina Faso, one important question remains: will today's transportation reforms become the beginning of lasting economic transformation, or will they be remembered only as ambitious projects launched during a difficult chapter in the nation's history? Only time can answer that question. Even so, one fact is already becoming clear: transportation has become one of the central pillars of Burkina Faso's long-term vision. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, electric buses, digital taxi services, improved roads, railway ambitions, and urban development are no longer separate initiatives. Together, they represent an effort to reduce transportation costs, strengthen domestic trade, expand economic opportunity, and gradually build greater national self-reliance. Whether every objective is fully achieved or not, the strategy reflects the belief that sustainable development begins with infrastructure capable of connecting people, businesses, and markets. Burkina Faso's experience also offers lessons for other African nations. Long-term development cannot rely only on natural resources or foreign assistance. It also requires investments that improve everyday life, while creating opportunities for businesses to grow. Affordable transportation, reliable infrastructure, and careful planning may not always attract global headlines, but they often become the foundation of lasting prosperity. At the same time, infrastructure alone cannot guarantee success. Transparent governance, effective maintenance, education, security, and sound economic management will determine whether today's investments continue benefiting future generations. Progress should ultimately be measured not by the number of buses or kilometers of highways, but by whether ordinary citizens enjoy better jobs, greater mobility, and higher living standards. Whatever the future may hold, Burkina Faso has already changed an important conversation. Instead of asking whether Africa can modernize, more observers are asking how determined leadership and strategic investment can reshape a nation. That discussion extends beyond Burkina Faso to the broader goals of Pan-African cooperation, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and the vision of an African new generation pursuing greater self-reliance. Ibrahim Traore and Captain Ibrahim Traore now stand at the center of that debate. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and join us as we continue exploring the remarkable transformation taking place across Africa. What happens when one of Africa's poorest nations begins building infrastructure at a speed that captures attention across the continent for many years? African countries have faced a familiar challenge. Roads are announced, projects are launched, and budgets are allocated. Yet, visible results often take years to appear. Delays, funding shortages, and dependence on outside support have slowed progress in many places. Today, Burkina Faso is trying a different approach. Across cities such as Bobo-Dioulasso and Ouagadougou, new roads, pavements, and public works are emerging through the Faso-Mabo initiative. Backed by the vision of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the program aims to mobilize local skills, local resources, and community participation to accelerate development. What makes this effort remarkable is not simply the construction itself. It is the fact that citizens can see tangible changes within months rather than years. For many people, development is no longer a promise for the future. It is becoming part of daily life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel for more stories about Burkina Faso's transformation and Africa's future. The first thing that surprises many observers is the speed of change. In Ouagadougou, more than 200,000 square meters of paving stones were installed within just a few months. Streets once covered in dust have become cleaner and easier to use. Similar improvements are appearing in other locations as well. This progress is attracting attention because many infrastructure projects across Africa often require much longer timelines before citizens notice meaningful results. Burkina Faso still faces significant economic and security challenges. Yet, despite those difficulties, Faso-Mabo is demonstrating that rapid action is possible. And that raises an important question. Could this be the beginning of a new model of African development built on action rather than waiting? What truly makes Faso-Mabo different is that it is not simply building roads. It is attempting to build national capacity at the same time. In many developing countries, infrastructure projects depend heavily on foreign contractors, imported expertise, and external funding. While such partnerships can deliver results, they often leave local communities with limited involvement in the actual construction process. Faso-Mabo is trying a different path. Across Burkina Faso, engineers, technicians, local businesses, volunteers, students, and members of the armed forces have all participated in various projects. The objective is not only to complete infrastructure, but also to strengthen the country's ability to build and maintain that infrastructure in the future. This approach has been particularly visible in cities such as Ouagadougou. Community members have contributed labor, businesses have supplied materials, and volunteers have supported construction activities. Rather than standing on the sidelines, citizens have become active participants in the development process. The involvement of local companies is also significant, by relying more heavily on domestic suppliers and workers. A larger share of project spending remains within the national economy. This creates opportunities for employment, skills development, and business growth. Another important element is the participation of the military. Beyond their traditional responsibilities, military personnel have joined certain development efforts, reinforcing the message that national progress is a responsibility shared by all sectors of society. So, for many supporters of Faso Mebo, the most important achievement is not the pavement itself. It is the growing belief that Burkinabe citizens can solve major challenges through their own effort and cooperation. That sense of ownership may prove just as valuable as any road, bridge, or public facility built through the program. If sustained over time, it could help create a stronger foundation for future development across the country. One reason Faso Mebo is attracting attention across Africa is that Burkina Faso is not relying only on traditional construction methods. The country is also experimenting with technical solutions designed for its specific environmental conditions. This is particularly important because Burkina Faso faces some of the toughest challenges for road infrastructure. During the dry season, temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius. During the rainy season, heavy downpours can quickly damage poorly constructed roads. These conditions have shortened the lifespan of many infrastructure projects across the region. To address these challenges, Faso Mebo has been testing improved construction techniques in Bobo Dioulasso. Engineers have worked with stabilized soil foundations, reinforced base layers, and semi-graded asphalt concrete designed to withstand both heavy traffic and harsh weather conditions. What makes this process noteworthy is the attention given to preparation before the final road surface is applied. Construction teams first clean and prepare the site. The ground is then strengthened using soil mixed with cement. After that, technical inspections are conducted to verify that the foundation can support the expected load. Only after those evaluations are completed does the project move to the next stage. This approach reflects a broader change in thinking. The objective is no longer simply to build roads as quickly as possible. The goal is to build roads that remain functional for many years, despite extreme heat, seasonal flooding, and increasing transportation demands. For Burkina Faso, this represents an important shift. Infrastructure is being treated not as a short-term achievement, but as a long-term investment. If these technologies continue to perform well, they could provide valuable lessons for other African countries facing similar environmental conditions. In the end, durability may become just as important as speed. A road that lasts for decades can create far greater value than one that must be rebuilt every few years. Rapid construction often raises an important question. Can quality keep pace with speed? This is one of the most common concerns raised whenever large infrastructure projects move quickly. Supporters may celebrate visible progress, but engineers know that long-term success depends on what lies beneath the surface. According to reports from Faso Mebo project sites, quality control has become a central part of the construction process. Before a road advances from one stage to another, technical teams perform a series of inspections designed to verify that each layer meets required standards. The process begins with site preparation and foundation work. Materials are carefully placed and compacted before engineers conduct geotechnical evaluations. These tests help determine whether the ground can safely support future traffic loads. Laboratory specialists also play an important role. Their responsibility is to examine construction materials, verify technical specifications, and identify potential weaknesses before they become costly problems. Rather than treating inspections as a final formality, the testing process is integrated throughout the project. This approach is particularly significant because road failures are often caused by problems that cannot be seen from the surface. A road may appear finished and attractive, but if the foundation is weak, cracks, sinking, and deterioration can emerge after only a few rainy seasons. Faso Mebo is attempting to avoid that outcome by combining speed with technical discipline. Every successful inspection creates confidence that the next construction phase can proceed safely. Of course, the true test will come over time. The durability of these roads will ultimately determine whether the model achieves its long-term objectives. However, the emphasis on geotechnical testing and quality assurance demonstrates that project leaders understand the importance of building infrastructure that lasts. For many observers, this may be one of the most encouraging aspects of the initiative. Fast development attracts attention, but reliable infrastructure earns trust. Burkina Faso is now attempting to achieve both at the same time. Behind many of the visible changes taking place in Burkina Faso stands a broader vision promoted by Captain Ibrahim Traore. While roads and infrastructure are the most visible outcomes, supporters argue that the real transformation is happening at the level of national thinking. For decades, many African countries have relied heavily on external financing, foreign contractors, and imported expertise to carry out major development projects. Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly emphasized a different idea. He argues that lasting progress requires countries to strengthen their own capacity to design, build, and maintain critical infrastructure. This philosophy is reflected throughout the Faso Mebo initiative. Local engineers are given greater responsibility. Domestic companies are encouraged to participate. Communities contribute labor and resources. Even members of the armed forces have joined development efforts in some regions. The objective extends beyond completing individual projects. The larger goal is to create a culture of self-reliance and national participation. This message has resonated with many citizens. In communities where people can directly observe new roads, public works, and urban improvements, infrastructure has become a visible symbol of national progress. Instead of waiting for change to arrive from outside, many people now feel they are helping create that change themselves. Supporters of the initiative often point to this shift in mindset as one of its greatest achievements. A road can improve transportation, but confidence in a nation's abilities can influence generations. At the same time, long-term success will depend on results. Citizens will ultimately judge the vision by the durability of projects, economic benefits, and continued improvements in daily life. Nevertheless, the influence of Ibrahim Traore on this movement is difficult to ignore. For many Burkinabe, Faso Mebo represents more than construction. It represents a belief that national development should be driven first by the energy, skills, and determination of the people themselves. Not everyone views Faso Mebo through the same lens. As the initiative has gained attention across Africa, it has also attracted criticism from some international observers and analysts. One common concern is sustainability. Critics argue that rapid infrastructure expansion may become difficult to maintain over the long term, especially in a country facing economic and security challenges. Others question whether local resources alone can support large-scale development projects for many years. Another criticism focuses on quality. Some observers worry that projects completed quickly could face durability problems in the future. Others suggest that public attention surrounding Faso Mebo may be growing faster than the evidence needed to measure its long-term impact. These concerns deserve consideration. Every major infrastructure program should be evaluated carefully, and long-term success can only be measured over time. However, supporters of Faso Mebo point to several important facts. Roads, pavements, and public works are being completed and used by citizens today, Technical inspections, geotechnical testing, and quality control procedures have been incorporated into the construction process. The initiative is also generating practical experience for local engineers, workers, and businesses. From this perspective, the debate should not focus only on predictions. It should also consider visible results already achieved on the ground. Perhaps the most important lesson is that development should ultimately be judged by outcomes rather than assumptions. If infrastructure remains durable and continues to improve economic activity, the initiative will strengthen its credibility. If weaknesses emerge, adjustments can be made. For now, Faso Mebo remains an ongoing experiment in national development. It is challenging traditional assumptions about how African countries can build infrastructure, mobilize communities, and increase self-reliance. Whether one views the initiative with optimism or skepticism, it has already succeeded in starting an important conversation about Africa's future. As we reach the end of this story, one conclusion becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Faso Mebo is not attracting attention simply because it is building roads. It is attracting attention because it is attempting to change the way development is approached in Burkina Faso. The initiative combines several elements that are rarely discussed together. It seeks to move quickly while maintaining technical standards. It promotes local participation while pursuing large infrastructure goals. It encourages self-reliance while addressing practical challenges that affect daily life. Whether paving streets in Ouagadougou, improving roads in Bobo-Dioulasso, or testing new construction methods designed for harsh environmental conditions, the broader message remains the same. Progress does not always have to wait for perfect circumstances. There are still important questions that only time can answer. Will these roads remain durable for decades? Can the model be expanded across the entire country? Will the economic benefits justify the investment? These are legitimate questions, and future results will provide the answers. Yet even critics acknowledge one undeniable fact. Visible projects are being completed. Communities are participating. Engineers are gaining experience. Citizens are witnessing change with their own eyes. Perhaps the greatest lesson for Africa is that development begins when people believe they have the ability to shape their own future. Infrastructure is not only about concrete, asphalt, and machinery, it is also about confidence, ownership, and national ambition. For many supporters, that may be the most significant achievement of all. What do you think? Could Faso Mebo become a model for other African nations? Or is its success unique to Burkina Faso? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth analysis of Pan-African development, Burkina Faso, Africa New Initiatives, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and the future vision of Ibrahim Traore, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next discussion. Something remarkable is happening in Burkina Faso. For decades, this West African nation was defined by a disadvantage it could never escape. Unlike coastal countries connected directly to global trade routes, Burkina Faso has spent its modern history trapped far from the sea. Every shipment of fuel, every imported machine, and every bag of rice had to travel through another country's territory before reaching its destination. Today, however, a new vision is beginning to take shape. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is pursuing a railway connection to Ghana's Tema port, a project that could transform the country's economic future. Supporters believe this railway is more than a transportation project. They see it as the first step toward turning Burkina Faso into a strategic gateway for the entire Sahel region. If that vision succeeds, Burkina Faso may no longer be known simply as a landlocked nation struggling to reach world markets. It could become a key link connecting millions of people and businesses across West Africa. Before we explore that possibility, Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories about Africa's infrastructure, economic transformation, and emerging leaders. To understand why this railway matters so much, we must first understand the hidden cost of being landlocked. For Burkina Faso, geography functions like an invisible tax. Every imported product carries additional transportation expenses, border delays, and logistical challenges. Those costs eventually reach ordinary citizens through higher prices for fuel, medicine, food, and construction materials. For decades, this geographic burden has limited economic growth and reduced competitiveness. The railway project aims to change that reality and give Burkina Faso a new path toward prosperity. The proposed railway linking Tema Port to Ouagadougou could become one of the most important infrastructure projects in modern West African history. On the surface, it appears to be a transportation corridor designed to move goods more efficiently between Ghana and Burkina Faso. In reality, its significance goes much deeper. This railway has the potential to reshape trade patterns, reduce economic isolation, and alter the strategic position of an entire country. Today, most imports entering Burkina Faso arrive through foreign ports before continuing inland by road. The journey is expensive, slow, and vulnerable to delays at borders and checkpoints. Transport costs are ultimately passed on to consumers and businesses, making economic growth more difficult. A modern railway connection would dramatically improve efficiency by moving large volumes of cargo faster and at a lower cost than road transport. The importance of the project becomes even clearer when looking at the map. Tema is one of the most important ports in West Africa and provides direct access to global shipping routes. By connecting Ouagadougou to this gateway, Burkina Faso gains a more reliable link to international markets. Manufacturers could import machinery more easily. Farmers could gain better access to export opportunities. Businesses could reduce logistical expenses and become more competitive. Supporters of the project believe its impact would extend far beyond trade. Lower transportation costs often encourage investment, industrial activity, and economic diversification. Areas along the railway corridor could attract warehouses, processing facilities, logistics companies, and supporting industries. What begins as a transport project could eventually become an engine of regional development. For Burkina Faso, the railway represents something larger than steel tracks and freight trains. It represents a chance to overcome one of the country's greatest historical disadvantages. Instead of being constrained by geography, the nation could begin using infrastructure to redefine its future and strengthen its connection to both regional and global markets. For most of its history, Burkina Faso has occupied the end of the supply chain. Goods entered the country from foreign ports, moved across long distances, and finally reached Ouagadougou. The capital functioned as a destination rather than a crossroads. The railway project could fundamentally change that role. The long-term vision extends far beyond connecting Burkina Faso to the sea. If future railway links are developed toward Mali and Niger, Ouagadougou could become the central hub of a new regional transport network. Instead of being the final stop for imported goods, the city could become the point where trade routes intersect and redistribute products throughout the Sahel. This possibility becomes even more significant when viewed through the lens of the Alliance of Sahel States, commonly known as AES. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger together represent a market of nearly 80 million people. All three countries face similar challenges, including limited access to global markets and heavy dependence on transportation corridors controlled by neighboring states. A connected railway network would offer a different future. Goods arriving at Tema Port could move directly into Burkina Faso and then continue toward Mali and Niger. Agricultural products, minerals, manufactured goods, and energy supplies could circulate more efficiently within the region. The economic benefits would not be limited to one country. The entire alliance could gain stronger access to international trade and greater control over its supply chains. For Ouagadougou, the transformation could be historic. Cities become important not only because of population size, but because of their position within trade networks. Throughout history, major commercial centers emerged where routes converged. Supporters of the railway believe Burkina Faso now has an opportunity to create such a center in the heart of West Africa. If that vision becomes reality, Burkina Faso will no longer be remembered as a country trapped by geography. It may instead be recognized as the strategic crossroads connecting the Atlantic coast to the vast interior of the Sahel. A railway can move cargo, but its true impact is often measured by everything that develops around it. Throughout history, major transport corridors have created new industries, attracted investment, and transformed entire regions. Supporters of the Tema-Ouagadougou Railway believe the same process could unfold across Burkina Faso. One of the most immediate benefits would be lower transportation costs. When moving goods becomes cheaper and more reliable, businesses gain greater confidence to invest. Warehouses, distribution centers, and logistics companies often emerge near major rail connections because they can move products more efficiently. These facilities create jobs and stimulate local economic activity. Industrial development could also accelerate. Manufacturers depend on predictable supply chains. Access to a modern railway would make it easier to import machinery, raw materials, and equipment while reducing delivery times. This could encourage the growth of processing industries that add value to local resources before export rather than sending raw materials abroad. Agriculture may benefit as well. Burkina Faso's farmers often face difficulties reaching large markets at competitive prices. Improved transportation could help agricultural products move more quickly and efficiently to domestic and international buyers. Reduced logistics costs could increase profitability for producers and encourage higher levels of production. The railway could also support energy distribution throughout the country. Fuel transported through efficient logistics networks tends to be less expensive and more accessible. Better access to energy can support factories, businesses, and infrastructure projects that drive further development. Perhaps most importantly, the project could create opportunities for young people. Construction, maintenance, transportation, warehousing, and industrial services all require skilled workers. New economic activity along the railway corridor could generate employment in areas that have historically lacked investment. For many supporters, this is why the railway matters. The goal is not simply to move freight. The goal is to create an economic corridor capable of generating jobs, attracting industries, and laying the foundation for long-term national development. Ambitious infrastructure projects often inspire hope, but they also face significant obstacles. The proposed railway linking Burkina Faso to Ghana is no exception. While supporters see it as a path toward economic transformation, several challenges could slow progress or even prevent the vision from being fully realized. The first challenge is financing. Building and maintaining hundreds of kilometers of modern railway infrastructure requires billions of dollars in investment. For a country with limited financial resources and many competing priorities, securing long-term funding remains a major hurdle. International investors will want assurances that the project can generate sustainable returns. Security is another concern. Burkina Faso continues to face threats from armed extremist groups operating in various parts of the country. Although the proposed corridor passes through relatively more stable areas, protecting rail infrastructure over long distances will require significant resources and planning. Political uncertainty also presents risks. Large infrastructure projects often take many years to complete. During that time, governments, policies, and regional relationships can change. Any major shift in political priorities could affect timelines and implementation. Finally, the broader AES vision remains incomplete. The railway's full strategic value depends on future connections to Mali and Niger. Without those extensions, Burkina Faso would gain an important transport link but may not achieve its larger goal of becoming the logistics hub of the Sahel. These challenges are real. Yet, supporters argue that every transformative project faces obstacles. The question is whether Burkina Faso can overcome them and turn vision into reality. The debate surrounding Burkina Faso's railway vision extends far beyond transportation. Supporters see it as a bold attempt to reshape the country's economic future, while critics question whether such ambitions are realistic under current conditions. Some Western analysts argue that political uncertainty, security challenges, and limited financial resources make projects of this scale difficult to sustain. Others warn that major infrastructure investments may struggle without stronger institutions and broader international support. Supporters of the project offer a different perspective. They argue that many transformative infrastructure projects around the world were once considered unrealistic. Countries that successfully changed their economic trajectories often did so by investing in long-term strategic assets rather than accepting existing limitations. From this viewpoint, the question is not whether Burkina Faso faces obstacles. The question is whether the country should continue accepting the constraints that have limited its development for decades. There is also a broader lesson for Africa. Geography does not have to determine destiny. Several nations have demonstrated that strategic infrastructure, regional cooperation, and long-term planning can reduce the disadvantages associated with being landlocked. For Burkina Faso, the railway represents an attempt to apply that lesson on a national scale. The project also highlights the growing importance of regional integration. A stronger connection between Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and coastal trade routes could encourage economic cooperation across the Sahel. Infrastructure has the power to connect markets, create opportunities, and strengthen economic resilience in ways that political declarations alone cannot achieve. Whether the railway ultimately succeeds or fails remains uncertain. What is certain is that the vision behind it is larger than steel tracks and freight trains. It is a vision of a country seeking to redefine its place in West Africa. For decades, Burkina Faso was known as a landlocked nation facing geographic limitations. Today, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the country is pursuing a different future. The dream is not simply to reach the sea. The dream is to become a gateway connecting the Sahel to the world. As discussions about Pan-African development continue, Burkina Faso, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, Africa, New Opportunities, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and Ibrahim Traore himself remain at the center of one of the most closely watched transformation stories on the continent. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Do you believe Burkina Faso can become the logistics hub of AES, or will geography remain its greatest challenge? For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso watched its wealth leave the country in its most basic form. Gold was dug from the ground but refined elsewhere. Cotton was harvested from the fields but turned into fabric in foreign factories. Farmers worked under the hot Sahel sun, yet much of the value created from their labor ended up thousands of miles away. Now imagine something different. Imagine a market of 1.4 billion consumers suddenly opening its doors to Burkina Faso. Imagine those doors opening without tariffs, without many of the barriers that have traditionally limited African exports. For many observers, that announcement from China was the headline. But the real story may not be happening in Beijing at all. The real story may be unfolding in Ouagadougou. Because while China was opening a market, Ibrahim Traore was preparing something else. He was preparing Burkina Faso to enter that market differently than before. Before we explore that possibility, it is important to understand what Burkina Faso has been trying to escape for decades. The country followed a familiar pattern seen across much of Africa. Raw materials left. Wealth left with them. Cotton was exported as cotton. Gold was exported as gold. Agricultural products were exported with little processing. The countries that bought those resources often earned far more by refining, manufacturing, packaging, and selling finished products than Burkina Faso earned from producing the resources themselves. That reality created a painful contradiction. Burkina Faso was rich in resources but struggled to translate those resources into widespread prosperity. The problem was never the absence of wealth beneath the soil. The problem was the inability to capture enough value before that wealth crossed the border. Today, that may finally be starting to change. China's decision to grant zero-tariff access to African exports is being described by many economists as one of the most significant trade openings in modern African history. For Burkina Faso, the announcement was especially important because it offered something that previous generations rarely had direct access to: one of the largest consumer markets on Earth. A market of 1.4 billion people changes the conversation. For years, African nations were often told that development depended on aid packages, loans, or foreign assistance programs. China presented something different. Instead of offering a donation, it offered market access. Instead of promising support in the future, it reduced barriers that had previously made trade more difficult. That distinction matters. Aid can help solve temporary problems. Access to customers can create long-term economic growth. Under the new arrangement, products from Burkina Faso can enter China with significant advantages compared to many previous trade conditions. For farmers, exporters, chiminijuts, and manufacturers, that creates opportunities that simply did not exist before. But it is important to understand what this policy does and does not do. Zero tariffs do not automatically make a country rich. They do not build factories. They do not train workers. They do not create industrial capacity. What they do is open a door. And history shows that open doors only benefit nations that are prepared to walk through them. This is why the story becomes much more interesting when we shift our attention from Beijing to Burkina Faso itself. China has provided access to the market. The question is what Burkina Faso intends to sell inside that market. If the country continues exporting mostly raw materials, the gains may be limited. Raw cotton, raw gold, and unprocessed agricultural products generate far less value than finished goods. But if Burkina Faso can export refined gold, textiles, processed foods, and manufactured products, then the impact of zero tariffs becomes far more powerful. The opportunity is real. The challenge is real as well. And that challenge is exactly where Ibrahim Traore enters the story. Ibrahim Traore appears to understand a reality that many resource-rich countries have struggled to overcome. Having valuable resources is not enough. The real question is, who captures the value created from those resources? For decades, Burkina Faso exported gold and cotton while most of the higher value activities happened elsewhere. Refining, manufacturing, branding, packaging, and large-scale distribution were often controlled outside the country. As a result, Burkina Faso participated in global trade, but remained near the bottom of the value chain. Traore has repeatedly argued that this model cannot continue if the country hopes to achieve genuine economic sovereignty. His approach is built around a simple idea. Burkina Faso should not only extract resources, it should process them. One of the clearest examples is gold. Instead of sending large amounts of gold abroad for refining, the government has supported the creation of a national gold refinery. The goal is not merely symbolic. Refining gold inside Burkina Faso allows more economic activity to remain within the country. It creates jobs, develops technical expertise, improves oversight, and potentially increases government revenue. The same thinking is visible in the mining sector more broadly. Through state participation and greater control over strategic resources, the government is attempting to ensure that national wealth contributes more directly to national development. But perhaps the most important aspect of Traore's vision is not a specific project. It is a change in mindset. For generations, many African economies were encouraged to focus on extraction, produce raw materials, export them, import finished goods. Traore is challenging that formula. He is asking a different question. What happens when the country that grows the cotton also produces the fabric? What happens when the country that mines the gold also refines the gold? What happens when economic value stays closer to the people who create it? Those questions are becoming increasingly important because China has now opened a market that may reward countries capable of producing more than raw materials. And that is exactly why the next stage of Burkina Faso's strategy may prove even more important than the first. If gold represents Burkina Faso's mineral wealth, cotton represents its opportunity to build a modern industrial economy. For decades, Burkina Faso has been one of West Africa's major cotton producers. Every year, farmers grow and harvest cotton across the country. Yet the biggest profits have rarely stayed in Burkina Faso. The reason is simple. Cotton was often exported as a raw material. Once it left the country, the next stages of production happened elsewhere. Foreign factories turned cotton into yarn. Yarn became fabric. Fabric became clothing. Each step added value, created jobs, and generated profits outside Burkina Faso. This is the cycle that Ibrahim Traore wants to change. One of the most important symbols of that effort is the IRO Tex Burkina textile project. The goal is not simply to build another factory. The goal is to create a larger industrial chain inside Burkina Faso. The vision follows a clear path. Cotton becomes yarn. Yarn becomes fabric. Fabric becomes finished products. Every stage creates additional value. Every stage creates more employment opportunities. Every stage allows more money to remain inside the national economy. This is how many successful manufacturing nations developed. They did not become wealthy simply because they possessed natural resources. They became wealthy because they learned how to process those resources themselves. The difference can be enormous. A single bale of cotton provides income mainly for the farmer who produces it. A textile industry supports farmers, factory workers, transport companies, technicians, managers, and exporters at the same time. That is why industrialization matters so much to Burkina Faso's future. And if China's tariff-free market remains open, Burkina Faso may eventually export textiles and finished products instead of raw cotton alone. If that happens, the country will not simply be selling resources. It will be selling value, jobs, and economic strength created at home. History is full of nations that missed great opportunities because they were not prepared when those opportunities arrived. Burkina Faso is attempting something different. At almost the exact moment China opened its market to African exports, Burkina Faso began taking steps to increase domestic processing, strengthen industrial capacity, and gain greater control over its resources. Whether by design or coincidence, these two developments are now intersecting in a way that could reshape the country's economic future. Think about the situation from a strategic perspective. China has created access to one of the largest consumer markets in the world. That opportunity alone is significant. But market access only becomes transformative when producers have something valuable to sell. This is where Traore's economic vision becomes important. Here's the National Gold Refinery, textile projects, and efforts to expand local processing are all attempts to ensure that Burkina Faso enters global markets with higher value products rather than raw materials alone. In many ways, this is a story about preparation meeting opportunity. For decades, Burkina Faso had resources but lacked sufficient industrial capacity. Now, industrial capacity is beginning to emerge just as a major export market becomes more accessible. That combination does not guarantee success. There are still major challenges ahead. Factories must become productive. Workers must be trained. Infrastructure must improve. Investment must continue. But opportunities of this scale do not appear every generation. That is why many supporters of Traore believe the current moment may represent a historic turning point. Not because China is offering special favors, not because prosperity is guaranteed, but because Burkina Faso may finally have a chance to move from exporting what it has to exporting what it creates. China opened the door. Traore is trying to build the road that leads to it. And for the first time in many decades, those two developments are happening at the same time. Not everyone is convinced that Burkina Faso is moving in the right direction. Critics in Western policy circles often argue that the country may simply be replacing one dependency with another. According to this view, moving away from France while building closer economic ties with China does not automatically create economic sovereignty. It merely changes the identity of the external partner. Others argue that China is primarily interested in access to African resources and new markets for Chinese products. They point to trade imbalances and warn that African countries could remain suppliers of raw materials if they fail to industrialize. These concerns deserve serious consideration. However, there is another side to the debate. Every major power pursues its own interests. France did. Britain did. The United States does. China does as well. The real question is not whether China benefits. The real question is whether Burkina Faso benefits at the same time. That answer will depend on what happens inside Burkina Faso over the next several years. If the country continues exporting mainly raw gold, raw cotton, and unprocessed agricultural products, many critics may be proven correct. But if Burkina Faso succeeds in refining its gold, expanding textile production, and developing local processing industries, the outcome could look very different. In that scenario, China would not simply become a buyer of resources, it would become a customer for products carrying more value created inside Burkina Faso itself. Ultimately, the debate is not about China versus the West. It is about whether Burkina Faso can finally move higher in the global value chain and capture more of the wealth generated by its own resources. The story of Burkina Faso is not really about tariffs. It is not even primarily about China. It is about what a nation chooses to do when a rare opportunity appears. For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso exported raw materials while much of the value created from those materials was captured elsewhere. Gold left the country. Cotton left the country. Agricultural products left the country. The resources were Burkinabe, but the greatest rewards often were not. Today, the situation may be changing. China has opened a market of 1.4 billion consumers. For the first time, Burkina Faso has access to an enormous commercial opportunity with fewer barriers than ever before. But history teaches us that open markets alone do not create prosperity. Factories create prosperity. Skills create prosperity. Industrial capacity creates prosperity. That is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore matter so much in this moment. While many people focus on the open door in China, Traore has been focused on preparing what Burkina Faso will carry through that door. Gold refining, textile production, agricultural processing. These are not simply economic projects. They are attempts to keep more value inside the country and build a stronger foundation for future generations. The outcome is still uncertain. The challenges remain enormous. But for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso is trying to move beyond the role of a supplier of cheap raw materials and toward the role of a producer of higher-value goods. Whether that vision succeeds or fails will shape the future of the country for years to come. And perhaps that is the lesson for Africa New, for the Pan-African movement, for the African Union, and for every nation seeking greater economic sovereignty. The goal is not simply to own resources. The goal is to transform those resources into lasting prosperity. That is the vision many supporters see in Captain Ibrahim Traore, in Burkina Faso, in Pan-Africanism, and in the broader hopes surrounding Ibrahim Traore's economic agenda. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us as we continue exploring the stories shaping the future of Africa. For years, the world has associated Burkina Faso with military coups, terrorism, and political instability. International headlines often focus on conflict, security crises, and foreign influence. Yet, while much of the world watches the battlefield, Captain Ibrahim Traore appears to be focusing on something far less dramatic but potentially far more important. Water, not gold, not foreign aid, not international loans. Water. What if the future of a nation does not begin with political speeches, but with reservoirs, irrigation systems, and productive farmland? What if the most powerful tool for national sovereignty is not a weapon, but the ability to feed your own people? That is the question at the center of one of the most ambitious projects unfolding in Africa today. While many African countries continue spending billions of dollars importing food, Burkina Faso is pursuing a different path. Ibrahim Traore is investing in water infrastructure with the goal of increasing agricultural production, creating jobs, and reducing dependence on external support. Today, we will explore why this strategy could become a turning point, not only for Burkina Faso, but also for the wider African continent. If you enjoy thoughtful discussions about Africa's future and the leaders shaping it, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community. To understand why this project matters, we must first understand the challenge it is trying to solve. Africa possesses roughly 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. It has fertile soil, millions of farmers, and enormous agricultural potential. Yet many African nations still spend vast amounts of money importing food every year. This creates an important question. How can a continent with so much agricultural potential struggle to feed itself? The answer is not a lack of land or labor. In many cases, the real problem is infrastructure. Without reliable systems to capture, store, and distribute water, agricultural production remains limited. And when production remains limited, dependence on food imports continues. If Ibrahim Traore's water strategy appears unusual today, it is because it challenges how many governments have approached development for decades. When countries face food shortages, the most common response is often food imports, foreign assistance, or temporary support programs. While these measures may ease immediate pressure, they rarely solve the underlying problem. Traore appears to be following a different path. Instead of asking how Burkina Faso can purchase more food, he is asking how Burkina Faso can produce more food. That simple shift in thinking may be the foundation of his entire development strategy. At the center of this strategy is a powerful chain of cause and effect. Water supports production. Production generates income. Income creates jobs. Jobs strengthen communities. Strong communities support national stability, and stability helps protect sovereignty. This is why water has become such a strategic priority. For many years, farmers across Burkina Faso depended heavily on seasonal rainfall. Their harvests often rose or fell based on weather conditions beyond their control. A weak rainy season could reduce production. A drought could threaten livelihoods and local food supplies. Under those conditions, farming becomes uncertain. Traore's approach seeks to reduce that uncertainty. Reliable water supplies allow farmers to plan ahead. They can cultivate more land, extend growing seasons, and improve productivity. Greater productivity can increase household income and support local economic activity. This idea also changes the way sovereignty is understood. Many people associate sovereignty with military strength, borders, or political independence. Those factors matter. However, economic independence is equally important. A nation that depends heavily on imported food remains vulnerable to external shocks and rising global prices. A nation that can feed itself gains greater control over its future. That appears to be the larger objective behind Traore's strategy. He is not simply investing in water infrastructure. He is attempting to build the foundations of long-term self-reliance and national resilience. The vision behind Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is no longer just an idea. It is being translated into physical infrastructure across Burkina Faso. One of the most significant elements of this strategy is the nationwide effort to restore and expand water storage capacity. Rather than focusing only on building new projects, the government has also launched an ambitious program to rehabilitate existing dams that have gradually lost effectiveness over time. Many reservoirs across the country have suffered from sediment accumulation, reducing their ability to store water during the rainy season. As capacity declines, farmers have less access to water during dry periods, limiting agricultural production and economic activity. To address this challenge, Burkina Faso has introduced a plan to rehabilitate approximately 100 dams across the country. The objective is not simply to repair aging infrastructure. The larger goal is to strengthen the country's ability to capture, store, and distribute water more efficiently. Another major development has been the creation of the National Office for Dams and Hydro-Agricultural Development, known as ONBAH. The establishment of ONBAH represents an important shift in approach. Large development projects often fail when they depend entirely on political promises. Governments change, priorities shift, and projects lose momentum. By creating a dedicated institution, Burkina Faso is attempting to transform a political vision into a long-term national program. This may be one of the most important aspects of Traore's strategy. Infrastructure alone does not create transformation. Institutions create continuity. The mission of ONBA extends beyond construction. The agency is responsible for coordinating dam rehabilitation, supporting irrigation expansion, improving water management, and helping create conditions for increased agricultural production. For the first time in many years, Burkina Faso appears to be building a coordinated framework designed to turn water into a strategic national asset rather than a seasonal opportunity. The creation of ONBA was only the beginning. For a strategy of this scale to succeed, institutions must be supported by resources, equipment, and execution. That is why Burkina Faso has invested heavily in machinery and technical capacity to accelerate dam rehabilitation and hydro-agricultural development. The government understands that ambitious plans alone cannot transform an economy. Real change requires the ability to move from policy discussions to visible results on the ground. This investment reflects a broader objective. Burkina Faso is not attempting to build a few isolated water projects. It is trying to create a national system capable of supporting agricultural growth across multiple regions. But why does this matter so much? Because a dam is far more than a concrete structure. Stored water becomes productive farmland. Productive farmland becomes harvests. Harvests become income. Income creates economic activity throughout local communities. When irrigation expands, farmers gain opportunities to cultivate crops beyond the traditional rainy season. Land that once remained unused during dry months can continue generating value throughout the year. The impact extends far beyond agriculture itself. Higher production creates opportunities for traders, transport operators, food processors, market vendors, and small business owners. As money circulates through local economies, entire communities benefit from increased economic activity. This is why many local residents view these projects with optimism. They are not celebrating engineering achievements alone. They are celebrating the possibility of greater opportunity. For many young people, the greatest challenge is not a lack of ambition. It is a lack of economic options. When communities can generate income locally, fewer people feel compelled to leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. In that sense, water becomes more than a resource. It becomes a tool for job creation, community development, and economic empowerment. And that may be exactly what makes this strategy so important for Burkina Faso's future. The economic benefits of water infrastructure extend beyond higher agricultural production. They also influence social stability in ways that are often overlooked. When people have access to work, they gain more than income. They gain confidence, purpose, and a stronger connection to their communities. Families are better able to plan for the future, invest in education, and improve their quality of life. This is particularly important for young people. Across many parts of Africa, one of the greatest challenges is not a shortage of talent or ambition. It is the shortage of opportunities. When jobs are scarce and economic prospects appear limited, many young people feel pressured to leave their communities in search of a better future. Some move to cities. Others leave their countries entirely. As a result, rural communities often lose valuable workers and experience slower economic development. This is where Traore's water strategy takes on a broader significance. By supporting agricultural growth and local economic activity, water infrastructure can help create conditions that encourage people to remain and invest in their own communities. The connection between development and security is often underestimated. Most discussions about national security focus on military operations, weapons, and border protection. These elements are important. However, long-term stability also depends on whether citizens believe they have a future worth protecting. Communities with jobs, businesses, and productive farmland tend to be more resilient than communities facing persistent economic hardship. This does not mean dams can solve every security challenge facing Burkina Faso. They cannot, but they can help address some of the underlying economic pressures that contribute to instability. That may be why Traore's strategy is attracting attention across Africa. While many leaders focus primarily on immediate crises, Burkina Faso appears to be investing in conditions that could support long-term stability. In this vision, water is not only a development resource, it is also part of a larger strategy to strengthen the nation from the ground up. Not everyone views Ibrahim Traore's strategy through the same lens. In much of the Western media, discussions about Burkina Faso often focus on political issues, military rule, democratic concerns, and Security challenges. Critics argue that long-term development requires strong institutions, political accountability, and respect for civil liberties in addition to economic reforms. These concerns deserve consideration. No country can achieve lasting progress through infrastructure projects alone. Economic development, political stability, effective governance, and public trust must work together. At the same time, supporters of Traore argue that an important part of the story is frequently overlooked. While international attention often centers on political controversies, Burkina Faso is also investing in agriculture, water management, and productive infrastructure. From this perspective, the country's efforts to strengthen food production and reduce dependence on imports deserve serious examination. A balanced assessment requires avoiding both extremes. Traore should not be portrayed as a flawless leader capable of solving every challenge facing Burkina Faso. But neither should every development initiative be dismissed because of political disagreements. The most useful question is not whether people support or oppose Traore personally. The real question is whether these projects produce measurable results. Will farmers have greater access to water? Will food production increase? Will rural incomes improve? Will communities become more resilient over time? Those are the indicators that will ultimately determine success or failure. Years from now, observers may look beyond today's political debates and focus on a simpler question. Did Burkina Faso become stronger, more productive, and more self-reliant because of these investments? That is the test that matters most. As we reach the end of this story, one thing becomes clear. The real significance of Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is not the dams themselves. It is the vision behind them. For decades, discussions about development in Africa have often focused on aid, loans, and external support. Burkina Faso is attempting to explore a different path. Instead of concentrating solely on consumption, it is investing in the ability to produce. That is why water matters. Water supports agriculture. Agriculture supports livelihoods. Livelihoods support stability. And stability creates the conditions for genuine sovereignty. Whether this strategy ultimately succeeds remains uncertain. The dams must continue operating. Irrigation systems must expand. Farmers must increase production. Communities must experience measurable improvements in their daily lives. Those outcomes will determine the true legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Yet, regardless of the final results, an important conversation has already begun. Can African nations strengthen their future by investing more heavily in productive infrastructure? Can food security become a central pillar of national sovereignty? Can the ideals of Pan-Africanism be translated into practical policies that improve the lives of ordinary citizens? These questions extend far beyond Burkina Faso. They matter to the African Union, to advocates of a Pan-African future, and to everyone interested in what many describe as an Africa new era of self-reliance and development. Perhaps that is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore continue attracting attention across the continent. The future will reveal whether this vision delivers lasting change. But for now, Burkina Faso is offering a powerful idea. A nation becomes stronger when it can feed, employ, and empower its own people. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe and join us for future discussions. In the vast and unforgiving Sahel, where drought, food shortages, and economic hardship have challenged generations, a remarkable story is unfolding. It is not taking place in a major industrial city. It is not driven by billion-dollar corporations. Instead, it is happening on the calm waters of a reservoir in Burkina Faso, where thousands of fish are transforming the future of an entire nation. Just a few months ago, the fish released into floating cages at the Samandeni Reservoir weighed only a few grams. Few people expected anything extraordinary. Many assumed it would be another agricultural experiment that produced modest results and eventually faded from public attention. Yet what happened next surprised farmers, technicians, government officials, and even experienced observers of African agriculture. In only about 4 months, some of those fish had grown to nearly 1 kilogram. The first harvest produced tons of fish, creating a result that many believed would require years to achieve. At a time when many African countries continue to depend heavily on imported food, Burkina Faso suddenly found itself attracting attention for a completely different reason. It was producing real food, creating real jobs, and generating real income. The significance of this achievement goes far beyond aquaculture. For years, Burkina Faso faced serious challenges related to food security. Climate pressures reduced agricultural productivity in many regions. Security challenges displaced communities and disrupted traditional livelihoods. At the same time, demand for affordable protein continued to grow. Fish consumption remained important, yet much of the supply came from outside the country. Against this backdrop, a simple question emerged. What if one of Burkina Faso's greatest resources had been overlooked all along? Ibrahim Traore and his government began looking at the country's reservoirs not merely as sources of irrigation water, but as untapped economic assets capable of helping feed the nation. The decision itself was surprisingly simple. Instead of investing years and enormous sums of money into building entirely new food production systems, the government chose to use something Burkina Faso already possessed. Across the country stood reservoirs and dams originally built for irrigation and water management. Among them, Samandeni was one of the largest and most important. For decades, most people viewed the reservoir through a narrow lens. It stored water, it supported agriculture, it helped local communities survive dry seasons. Yet, Ibrahim Traore's administration saw another possibility hidden in plain sight. What if these vast bodies of water could become engines of food production? That question led to one of the most ambitious aquaculture initiatives the country had ever attempted. Rather than relying on traditional fish ponds that require large areas of land and significant water management, officials promoted floating cage farming. The approach was practical, relatively affordable, and capable of producing fish at a scale that conventional methods struggled to match. The choice of tilapia was equally strategic. Tilapia is known throughout Africa for its resilience, rapid growth, and ability to adapt to different environmental conditions. It is popular among consumers, relatively affordable to raise, and capable of reaching market size quickly when managed properly. For a country seeking faster results in its fight for food security, it was an ideal candidate. What makes this story especially important is that it reflects a broader development philosophy that has become closely associated with Ibrahim Traore. Instead of focusing first on external solutions, the emphasis has increasingly been placed on domestic resources, existing infrastructure, local labor, available water, and national expertise are treated as assets rather than limitations. In many countries, development plans spend years moving through studies, consultations, and funding negotiations before citizens see tangible results. At Samandeni, the objective was different. The goal was action. The reservoir was already there. The water was already there. The demand for fish already existed. What remained was the willingness to connect those pieces and move quickly. Within months, that decision would begin producing results that few could ignore. What happened next turned a local agricultural project into a national talking point. When the first cages were stocked, expectations were cautious. Fish fingerlings weighing only 2 or 3 grams were introduced into the floating enclosures. Farmers hoped for decent growth. Technicians expected encouraging results. Few imagined they were about to witness one of the fastest production cycles seen in the country's aquaculture sector. As the weeks passed, the numbers became increasingly difficult to ignore. The fish were growing at an exceptional rate. By the time the first harvest arrived, many tilapia had reached between 700 grams and 1 kilogram in weight. For experienced fish farmers, this was remarkable. In many conventional systems, reaching similar sizes can take 8 months, 10 months, or even longer depending on conditions and management practices. The first official harvest at Samandeni provided the proof everyone had been waiting for. Approximately 15 tons of fish were collected during the initial harvesting operations. Some individual cages produced between 4 and 5 tons of fish. What began as an experiment was suddenly generating commercial-scale results. The reaction from participants was immediate. Farmers who had invested their time and effort expressed surprise at the speed of growth. Technicians monitoring the project described the outcomes as better than anticipated. Government representatives visiting the site pointed to the harvest as evidence that the country's food production strategy was beginning to move beyond speeches and into measurable achievements. One reason for the success appears to have been the quality of the water itself. Experts observed that the reservoir provided favorable conditions for fish development. Natural nutrients present in the water helped support growth. While the cage system allowed farmers to manage production more efficiently than many traditional approaches, perhaps the most important aspect of the harvest was psychological rather than technical. Citizens did not hear about projected results years into the future. They saw fish being harvested. They saw trucks transporting production. They saw workers earning incomes in a region often associated with scarcity. The images coming from Samandeni told a very different story. For many observers, the message was simple. This was no longer a promise. It was a result. The success of the first harvest was impressive, but the true significance of the project became clearer when its impact on ordinary people began to emerge. Fish farming at Samandeni was not simply producing food. It was creating opportunities in communities that had spent years facing economic uncertainty. Across Burkina Faso, many young people struggle to find stable employment. In rural areas, opportunities are often limited, especially for those who have completed technical training but cannot find work related to their skills. The floating cage project started to change that reality. Technicians, farm workers, transport operators, fish handlers, and support staff all became part of a growing value chain centered around aquaculture. For some participants, the project represented more than a job. It represented a second chance. Security challenges in various parts of the country had forced many families to leave their homes and traditional occupations. Some individuals who once depended on farming or fishing in other regions found new livelihoods around the reservoirs. Instead of remaining dependent on assistance, they became active contributors to a productive industry. Women also played an important role in the initiative. Entrepreneurs such as Madame Cabaret became symbols of what was possible when access to resources, training, and opportunity were combined. Her successful harvest demonstrated that aquaculture could become a profitable activity for individuals willing to invest effort and commitment. Behind every ton of harvested fish were dozens of personal stories. There were students gaining practical experience. There were workers supporting their families with new incomes. There were small business owners finding opportunities in transportation, distribution, and fish sales. These human stories often receive less attention than production figures, yet they reveal the true value of development. A successful project is not measured only by output. It is measured by the number of lives it improves. At Samandeni, the harvest was not only taking fish out of the water, it was bringing hope dignity, and economic opportunity into communities that needed them most. The question many observers began asking was straightforward. If the results were so impressive, why had similar breakthroughs not occurred years earlier? The answer reveals one of the most important lessons behind the success of the Samandeni project. In many countries, agricultural programs focus heavily on production while paying far less attention to everything that comes afterward. Farmers may receive equipment or training, but they are often left to solve the most difficult challenges on their own. They must find financing. They must secure feed. They must locate buyers. They must transport products to market. When one part of the chain fails, the entire project struggles. Burkina Faso approached the situation differently. The Floating Cage initiative was supported through a broader system designed to address multiple obstacles simultaneously. Producers received access to cages, fingerlings, technical assistance, and feed support. Financial institutions and government-backed programs helped reduce some of the barriers that would normally prevent participation. Equally important was the effort to support market access. Officials understood that fish farmers could not continue production if they were unable to sell their harvest quickly. Buyers and distributors were encouraged to participate, creating a mechanism that allowed fish to move from the cages to consumers with greater efficiency. This reduced uncertainty and increased confidence among producers. The result was a functioning value chain rather than a standalone farming project. Every link supported the next. Production supported processing. Distribution supported production. Financing supported expansion. Instead of treating fish farming as an isolated activity, it became part of a coordinated economic strategy. This helps explain why progress appeared so rapid. The success was not the product of luck. It was not the result of a single harvest. It emerged from organization, planning, and execution. While many development initiatives spend years attempting to build momentum, Samandeni demonstrated what can happen when infrastructure, policy, financing, and market demand move in the same direction. That alignment may be the project's most valuable achievement of all. As news of the harvest spread, reactions began emerging both inside and outside Burkina Faso. Supporters viewed the project as proof that the country could reduce its dependence on imported food through practical action. Others were more cautious. Some observers questioned whether a successful harvest from a limited number of cages could truly transform a national food system. Others wondered whether such rapid growth could be maintained over the long term. These questions are reasonable. Every major agricultural project faces challenges. Fish farming requires careful management of water quality, feed supply, logistics, and environmental sustainability. No serious observer would claim that a single harvest has solved every food security problem facing Burkina Faso. Yet focusing only on potential risks misses an equally important reality. The fish were harvested, the jobs were created, the infrastructure was installed, the production cycle worked. What critics viewed as an ambitious experiment had already produced measurable results, whether one supports or opposes the government's broader policies. The outcomes at Samandeni cannot simply be dismissed as theory. More importantly, the project offers lessons that extend far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, countless reservoirs, dams, rivers, and agricultural assets remain underutilized. Many countries possess resources capable of supporting local food production, yet those resources often remain disconnected from investment, organization, and long-term planning. The story of Samandeni demonstrates that development does not always begin with massive financial resources. Sometimes it begins with a different way of looking at existing assets. A reservoir becomes a food production center. A fishing project becomes a source of employment. a local initiative becomes a national symbol. This is why the project resonates with many supporters of Pan-African development. The lesson is not simply about fish farming. The lesson is about self-reliance. It is about recognizing value where others see limitations. It is about creating solutions from local resources rather than waiting for solutions to arrive from elsewhere. For many Africans watching this story unfold, that may be the most powerful message of all. Looking back at the events of those remarkable 4 months, it becomes clear that the story unfolding at Samandeni is about far more than fish. It is a story about how a nation facing serious economic and food security challenges chose to act rather than wait. It is a story about seeing opportunity where others saw limitations. Most importantly, it is a story about turning existing resources into practical solutions that improve people's lives. The floating cages on the waters of Samandeni have become symbols of something much larger. They represent a belief that development does not always require enormous wealth or unlimited foreign assistance. Sometimes it begins with leadership, organization, and the determination to make better use of what already exists. A reservoir becomes a source of food. A local project becomes a national conversation. A simple idea becomes a pathway toward greater self-reliance. The achievement of producing significant quantities of fish in such a short period does not mean every challenge has been solved. Burkina Faso still faces important obstacles, and the long-term success of the project will depend on continued investment, management, and expansion. Yet the first results have already demonstrated that meaningful progress is possible. For many observers across Africa, the lesson is powerful. A country does not need to wait for perfect conditions before taking action. It can begin with the resources it already possesses and build momentum through practical achievements. As Burkina Faso continues this journey, the project stands as an example of Pan-African determination and innovation. From the waters of Samandeni to the broader vision of a stronger Burkina Faso, the message is becoming increasingly clear. Under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore, new possibilities are emerging. The conversation about Africa New is no longer centered only on challenges, but also on solutions. For supporters of Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and those inspired by Captain Ibrahim Traore, this story offers a glimpse of what can happen when a nation chooses self-reliance over dependency and action over hesitation. If you believe stories like this deserve greater attention, share your thoughts below and follow the channel for more stories about Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, and the future of a rising Africa.
For decades, a quiet question has followed many young people in Burkina Faso. After graduation, what comes next? For too long, the expected answer was simple. Find a job, serve in office, work for a foreign company, or wait for a government position that may never come. But today, something different is happening. Inside technical universities, the sound of machines is beginning to replace the silence of theory alone. Students are no longer only memorizing formulas from a classroom board. They are touching concrete, testing materials, studying machines, and learning how real production works. That shift may seem small, but for a nation trying to regain control of its future, it is enormous. And this is why many people are asking a powerful question. Is Captain Ibrahim Traore helping end the old era when Burkinabe youth were trained mainly to work for others? Stay with this channel, because stories like this show how Africa is changing from the inside, not through promises from outside powers, but through the hands and minds of its own people. The old education model in many African countries was not built to create owners. It was built to create employees. After the colonial period, many systems continued to prepare students for administrative jobs, clerical work, or service roles inside institutions already controlled by others. In Burkina Faso, this meant that many talented young people were trained to seek permission before creating value. They were told that success meant being hired, but a country cannot build real independence if its brightest minds are only taught to wait for employment. That is the system now being challenged. Many supporters of the current reforms believe that changing this mindset is just as important as building new roads or factories. A nation that depends entirely